Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it very, very clear that if there is to be a deal, it will be along the terms that are acceptable to the state and the government of Israel. And those terms are really quite clear. They have not changed. Make no mistake about it. If the IDF does decide to pull the trigger on this operation inside Gaza City, despite all of the bluster and all of the jingoism of Hamas, we will destroy them. Hamas will not allow the Gazans to leave the area. In other words, in simple terms, they continue to use the civilians of Gaza as human shields. I think the real question is, why on earth do people continue to follow this imbecilic, weak non-entity that is Greta Thunberg? It's a really sad indictment on the judgment of so many individuals. Hi everybody. Before we get into today's briefing, I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to watch this content. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and to subscribe to the MirYam Institute YouTube channel, where you'll find much more analysis, our podcasts, and incredible and unique footage. If you want to see our very latest content, do not forget to hit the subscribe button and you'll get those notifications directly. And remember, we want to know what's on your mind. We want to hear your questions. So please send them over to us in the comment section. And with that, it's on with the briefing. So at this particular time, there's a lot of chatter about Hamas's apparent stated readiness to enter into some sort of a deal to bring about an end to the war and to return all of the hostages and to release prisoners held inside Israeli jails, prisoners including terrorists with blood on their hands. It's an interesting moment because, of course, it comes against the backdrop of two significant developments that are both aimed against Hamas's interests. The first is that the Israel Defense Forces is massing on the border of the Gaza Strip. There is a process underway of 60,000 reservists that are being mobilized. Many of those are already reporting to the line, and what that constitutes is a credible military threat against Gaza City there inside the Strip. So that's the first issue that's promoting and prompting Hamas to suggest that it might want to enter into a deal. The second is that President Donald Trump has expressed on his Truth Social that if Hamas wants this to end, and I'm paraphrasing, they need to release all of the remaining living hostages. He does not make mention of the 28 hostages who are presumed no longer to be alive, 2 of those bodies having been recently recovered from inside the Gaza Strip by way of IDF operations. But he did express that if Hamas wants to bring this to an end, they need to release all of our living hostages, something that certainly will trouble the family members of the hostages who are no longer alive for obvious reasons. And then in addition to that, there's this implicit support that is coming from President Trump toward the state of Israel to get on with this and to wrap up this war. And it's out of that context that Hamas is now talking about a deal to end the war. But it comes along with several conditions that Israel never accepted in the past, and Hamas has regurgitated now. The first of those is that it requires that the IDF withdraws in its entirety from the Gaza Strip. I don't believe that that's a reasonable position. I think that the Israel Defense Forces must, at the very least, hold control over the perimeter inside the Gaza Strip that we have taken during the course of this conflict. The second condition of Hamas is that it calls for the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. I'm not in favor of that condition either. I do not think that the outcome for a piece of territory from within which sprang forth a terrorist attack and a massacre such as the one that we saw on October the 7th, I don't think that the outcome for that territory after the IDF retaliates in the face of 1,200 Israelis being killed and 252 hostages being taken ought to be the reconstruction and even superior construction of high-rise buildings and apartment blocks for the residents of that area. So I'm not in favor of the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. And the third is a demand that the crossings are opened around the Gaza Strip, which by definition means that the IDF will have to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, that area that has allowed all of the contraband, all of the know-how, all of the training to be undertaken over many years through the passage between the south of the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. So those three conditions are not going to be accepted by the State of Israel, by the government of the State of Israel. And so I think that the negotiations may return, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it very, very clear that if there is to be a deal, it will be along the terms that are acceptable to the state and the government of Israel. And those terms are really quite clear. They have not changed. The return of all of our hostages, the living and the dead, and the end of Hamas as a threat to the state and to the people of Israel in perpetuity. And within that, of course, is the dismantling of their military capabilities and their complete, total, and utter disarmament. The words of Defense Minister Israel Katz to Hamas, wherein he states that they must accept Israel's terms for an end to this war, or they will see the destruction of Gaza City along lines similar to other cities inside the Gaza Strip, really speak to Israel's determination not to allow Hamas to remain in situ inside Gaza and not to bring about an end to this war in accordance with completely unacceptable and absurd terms and standards, most notably the retention of our hostages inside the Gaza Strip. So I think that Israel Katz is right to express this to Hamas. I think that Hamas would do very, very well to understand something, and I think that the viewers should understand the very same. There's a lot of talk and a lot of rhetoric about the complexity of the IDF operating inside Gaza City. That complexity is well-founded. It's well understood, it's well recognized by the soldiers of the IDF and by the officers of the IDF and by the commanders of the IDF and, of course, by the political echelons within Israel. But make no mistake about it, if the IDF does decide to pull the trigger on this operation inside Gaza City, despite all of the bluster and all of the jingoism of Hamas, we will destroy them inside Gaza City. If there is a kinetic engagement between Hamas in Gaza City and the Israel Defense Forces in the same location, Hamas will be destroyed militarily. Any fighting force that it masters there will lose, as has been the case until this point, as will continue to be the case in any future engagement between IDF forces and Hamas. So when Israel Katz highlights the determination of Israel to move forward unless we achieve our two war aims, both of which are in the gift of Hamas, to give to the State of Israel, I think that he's correct to do so. I think it's appropriate that he does so. And I also think that this raises another point that should not be forgotten. There is an outcome, a vision for an end of this war that has been put forward very, very clearly by President Donald Trump. It calls for the relocation of the Gazans outside of the Gaza Strip. I profoundly and wholeheartedly endorse that position. I think that it is eminently doable. I think that it needs to be pursued with far greater vigor on the part of Israel's leadership than is currently the case. I think that it should be implemented, and I think that it is absolutely along the lines of the conventions of the international community in the face of any other mass dislocation of a given population. That's where this should go. It's only by the Gazans being relocated elsewhere with any and all of the assistance that's required in order to bring about that relocation. It's only with their mass relocation that the State of Israel can actually know peace and security within its borders. In terms of recent social media footage that's emerged of Hamas really brutally beating Gazans who are refusing to transact with them, I'm not surprised by that, but it also goes to the heart of why the IDF is not yet operating in full force inside Gaza City. Contrary to how the international media portrays the IDF, and contrary to how too many in the area of public opinion insist on defaming the name of the members of the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF will not launch with full force its operations inside Gaza City until it has succeeded in moving the Gazans from the area that is about to become a hot combat zone. Now, there are about 1 million Gazans, approximately, who live inside Gaza City at this time. It's been estimated that about 18,000 of them have moved southward from Gaza City in accordance with IDF directives. And there's another smaller number that have actually moved north of Gaza City in order to follow through with the directives of the IDF in terms of vacating the area. But one of the main reasons that it's only 18,000 out of approximately 1 million citizens is that Hamas will not allow the Gazans to leave the area. In other words, in simple terms, they continue to use the civilians of Gaza as human shields. Quite literally, nothing other than that. They are not permitted to leave because Hamas knows that if the civilians leave, the IDF will move in. And as I said earlier, when we do so, we will crush any resistance that we face from Hamas. The killing of Abu Obeida is significant. It's more significant than I think many people would initially recognize and understand. He was the spokesperson for Hamas. He was the individual who was responsible for really raising the morale of Hamas and of the Gazans as the IDF continued really to plow through the terrorist forces that were marshaled by Hamas against us as we operated inside the Gaza Strip. He was very much a public figure inside Gaza writ large. And so his elimination is appropriate, it's proper, and as I said, it's significant. The notion that Israel will continue to eliminate Hamas leadership and Hamas members wherever they may be is, in my view, absolutely correct and proper. And it was stated at the beginning of this war that wherever Hamas leadership are, whether it be inside the Gaza Strip or elsewhere, they will be pursued, they will be targeted, and if the target should find them, they will be eliminated. So it's a very clear policy, it's an appropriate policy, and it's a correct policy. Many people will be aware of the fact that there is a flotilla that is bound towards the coast of Israel with a view to running the perfectly legal, perfectly understandable blockade that is currently enforced and was implemented by the state of Israel around our waters, including off the coast of the Gaza Strip. And this flotilla, unlike the previous flotilla, really is constituted of more ships and more vessels than in the past. It's actually something of a traveling collective of ships. It began in Barcelona, in Spain. It then moved to Tunis. It's expected to pick up further ships in Italy and then in Greece. And then dozens of ships are actually expected to approach Israeli waters. So it is more of a challenge. It's more of a challenge. It's a challenge that we will surmount, but it is more significant than the previous flotilla that was led by this completely unremarkable, unimpressive non-entity, Greta Thunberg. This is an individual who was caught bearing completely false testimony last time. Last time she failed, as she will this time, to breach the blockade, claiming that she had been kidnapped by members of the Israel Defense Forces. Of course, anybody who's fair-minded knows and recognizes that in no country can one simply sail up to the shoreline and decide to go walking onto sovereign soil. You have to have the appropriate permits for doing so. Even more so, in no country can somebody sail up to the shoreline and go walking into a hot war zone because they've decided they know what the remedy is to the ongoing conflict. So I think that this will be dealt with. It probably will garner a little bit more noise on social media and through the conventional media. But I think the real question is, why on earth do people continue to follow this imbecilic, weak non-entity that is Greta Thunberg? It's a really sad indictment on the judgment of so many individuals. At least they could find somebody a little bit more compelling than this individual who's quite similar to a character out of Lord of the Rings, if I may say so. But there is something that concerns me here, and I think everybody should be a little bit more concerned about the possibility of an attempt to run an airspace blockade. That's something that I am hearing that the anti-Israel protest movement is looking into. That's altogether more complicated, wherein they are seeking to fly planes towards Israeli airspace with a view to breaking our blockade, our sovereignty over our airspace there. So an interesting time. I'm sure this flotilla will be appropriately dealt with. The quicker that dealing comes about, the better.